My name is Leela Harper, and the afternoon my aunt laughed at the mark on my arm. The entire picnic table echoed her. She called it hideous, suggested I hide it before anyone lost their lunch. I stayed quiet. I just watched the curls of smoke drifting up from the barbecue, fighting to keep my hands from trembling, but then her husband, Colonel Marcus Hale, turned his gaze on me. His expression hardened. He shoved his chair away from the table, rose to his feet, and snapped his arm into a crisp salute. The chuckling vanished, and in that sudden hush, every buried hurt I'd carried for a decade surged forward, because the man she'd married was honoring the very thing she'd just ridiculed. I'd driven back to the Willamette Valley for my grandfather's 80th birthday, convincing myself it would be nothing more than a pleasant evening, no drama. I'd skipped too many family reunions already, and I craved a slice of normalcy, not another interrogation about the choices I'd made. The backyard overflowed with relatives, kids darting between folding chairs, the scent of charred burgers and fresh, cut grass thick in the summer air. I'd rolled my sleeves high that day, maybe testing whether the years had dulled their edges. They hadn't. Aunt Evelyn zeroed in on me the moment I crossed the lawn, her lipstick a glossy crimson, her smile laced with something sharper. She tilted her head toward the others, voice syrupy. "Folks are trying to enjoy their meal," she murmured, flicking her eyes at my forearm. "Maybe drape a napkin over that before we cut the cake." The word that landed like a slap. Nervous giggles skittered along the table, polite but real. Heat flooded my cheeks. For an instant, I nearly muttered sorry for taking up space. Then the metal chair beside her scraped the patio stones. Colonel Hale stood slowly, sunlight glinting off the silver in his hair, his stare locked on the jagged line of tissue. "Kandahar Province. You pulled Donovan out of the rubble." His tone cut clean through the chatter, not shouting, just certain. He squared his shoulders and delivered that salute across the checkered tablecloth. The laughter evaporated. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Evelyn's wineglass quivered, a crimson bead sliding down the stem and blooming across her ivory sundress. Nobody breathed. I sat rooted, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The crisp snap of that salute reverberated inside my ribcage. In that heartbeat, the atmosphere shifted. Respect had arrived, but it carried a chill of solitude. When I finally pushed back my own chair to leave, each footstep felt weighted, as though I were abandoning one war zone only to march into another. The morning after the cookout, I steered my pickup toward the weathered farmhouse my father had left behind. The porch boards groaned exactly as they had when I was 9 and racing barefoot after fireflies. Everything else appeared diminished, the rooms compressed by years of quiet. Aunt Evelyn trailed me inside, still talking, still weaving every sentence into a debt I supposedly owed. She gestured at the photographs lining the mantel, frames buffed until they reflected the ceiling like mirrors. Not one held my face. She reminded me how fortunate I was that she'd opened her home after Mom passed. I didn't push back. I'd given up arguing long ago. Her affection always arrived tethered to conditions. When she stepped into the kitchen to refill her coffee, I began gathering the last remnants of Dad's life: dog, eared paperbacks, a tarnished pocket watch, a cigar box stuffed with envelopes gone soft at the corners. One bore my name in his careful block letters. The flap was still sealed. My fingers shook as I slid a butter knife beneath it. The note was dated the week I shipped out for boot camp. His sentences were spare, deliberate. Nothing like the lectures I'd grown up dreading. "You were born to protect, not to perform." The air snagged in my throat. All those nights I'd lain awake, convinced he'd been ashamed of my enlistment. All the guilt I'd hauled across continents. It had never been his judgment. It had been hers. Evelyn must have intercepted the letter, certain she was sparing me pain. Instead, she'd robbed me of the one sentence that might have kept me upright. Standing in that immaculate, airless parlor, I understood her version of love had always been a collar disguised as kindness. And for the first time, I wondered what other truths she'd buried in her tidy drawers. Some nights when sleep refuses me, I still taste the smoke. Kandahar clings like burrs. The afternoon the convoy burned, I was crouched behind a Humvee, palms slick with someone else's blood, grit grinding between my teeth. I remember the metallic shriek an instant before the world flipped orange. The blast hurled me 10 feet, but I crawled toward the screaming. Too many shapes on the ground, too little light left. I had to pick. Sergeant Donovan lay trapped beneath a twisted door panel, eyes open, unnaturally calm. I pried metal with bare hands until my nails split, until the universe shrank to the wet rattle in his chest and the drum of my own pulse. The chopper arrived too late. Just before the monitor flatlined, he rasped, "Tell the old man I kept my nerve." Those 9 words lodged behind my eyes and replayed on loop for years. Stateside, I lived in long sleeves even when the mercury climbed past 100. Colleagues assumed modesty. Truth was, I couldn't stomach the map of that evening etched into my skin. Every invitation to speak at a school, every certificate with my name, I declined. Praise felt obscene when he'd paid the bill. It wasn't until that backyard barbecue that I discovered who the old man had been. Colonel Marcus Hale, the same officer who rose from his lawn chair while relatives snickered, the same man whose gaze carried the unmistakable gravity of shared loss. That night, alone in my motel room, I pushed fabric to my elbow and studied the scar under the harsh bathroom bulb. For the first time, the ridges didn't read as failure. They read as ledger entries, every frantic compression, every promise I'd whispered to a dying friend. Word traveled faster than my truck. By the time I reached the interstate, I'd already become the lead story in every cousin's group chat. Leela and her pathetic bid for sympathy. Aunt Evelyn phoned before noon, voice honed to a razor beneath its practiced lilt. "You made a fool of me in front of my bridge club. Marcus turned you into a circus act." I nearly laughed at the upside-down logic, but I simply ended the call and stared at the pale lightning bolt on my forearm. For years, it had been a private covenant between me and the dark. Now it was patio gossip. 48 hours later, my phone vibrated again. Colonel Hale this time, asking if I'd meet him at a diner near Fort Lewis. I hesitated, half dreading pity, half magnetized by the steadiness in his baritone. When I pushed through the glass door, he was already seated, uniform pressed, hands cradling a small navy box. He slid it across the formica. Inside rested a bronze pin, the insignia of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. My lungs forgot their job. He said he'd pulled the incident report years ago, recognized my name, memorized the timeline. Then his voice dropped, almost shy. Donovan was the boy we fostered at 12. Marlene never knew. Some ghosts don't belong at Sunday dinner. The coffee cooled between us, untouched. When words failed me, he added, "You gave my boy dignity. That mark cost more than any ribbon." Earned, the syllable landed like a medal I hadn't known I'd been chasing. Outside, the Tacoma sky hung low and restless. I walked to my truck with the pin biting into my palm, realizing respect wasn't inherited or bestowed by blood. It was witnessed by someone who'd counted the same price. I tried to settle back into routine, teaching trauma algorithms to wide-eyed corpsemen, but tranquility lasted less than a week. An email pinned from a morning show producer, the medic who conceals her battle wound. Attached was a grainy photo of me in desert camis, one only Evelyn could have unearthed from some forgotten album. She'd pitched my life as a feel-good segment on family forgiveness, naturally casting herself as the long-suffering saint and me as the prodigal who'd spat on her generosity. My commander summoned me the next day. Public affairs needs a statement on Kandahar. Optics. I heard the unspoken, your mess is now our problem. That evening, a plain manila envelope waited outside my apartment. No return address. Inside, paper the color of desert dusk. Handwriting I didn't recognize yet somehow knew. The note was from Donovan, scribbled in a moment of downtime. He wrote about missing his dog, about the way fear tasted metallic, about praying the noise would stop. The final sentence froze me solid, tell the medic her grip never wavered. My legs folded. I read it on the hallway carpet until the letters swam. When I dialed Hale, my voice cracked like thin ice. He listened, then exhaled a decade in one breath. I kept that page locked away. Couldn't face it until you did. Sand still clung to the creases. I stayed awake tracing the grains across my kitchen table, proof that some histories refuse varnish. Headlines could twist, strangers could gawk, but this sheet of paper was sovereign. By sunrise, I'd stopped flinching. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fabric bunched at my shoulder, and met my own eyes. If the world demanded a narrative, it would hear mine unfiltered. I phoned the producer myself. I'm coming on the program, but I'm driving the story. Studio lights blazed like interrogation lamps. I sat beneath them, pulse drumming in my ears, scar glowing under the glare. The segment was branded, Woman Beyond the Camouflage. The host, a polished blonde named Claire, smiled the smile of someone who'd never smelled burning diesel. Evelyn had orchestrated the booking, promising it would heal old wounds. I should have known her version of healing required my submission. As the red Tolly light blinked on, Claire read from the prompter, Leela Harper, injured during a routine training exercise. The falsehood detonated louder than any IED. The camera tightened on my forearm while a Chiron scrolled cruel emojis from the live feed. My inhale rattled in the microphone. Hale's warning echoed, if you don't speak, they will. I leaned in. That was no training mishap. It was an ambush outside a village called Argandab. 4 walked away because one couldn't. His name was Sergeant Donovan Hale. He died while I counted his heartbeats. The set went still. Claire's manicured fingers fluttered. I kept talking, about the way his blood soaked my knees, about the promise I made to carry his message home. When I finished, the control room forgot to cut to commercial. Silence stretched until a stagehand coughed. My phone erupted as I stepped into the corridor. The clip rocketed across platforms. Steady hands, Leela. Messages flooded from medics I'd never met, from Donovan's widow, you let him die a soldier, not a statistic. Hale texted a single line, you held the line. I didn't reply, but the corners of my mouth lifted. Somewhere in her McMansion, Evelyn watched her carefully curated world fracture in real time. The backlash arrived before breakfast. Evelyn rang first, fury vibrating through the speaker. You and Marcus humiliated me on morning television. Then Hale responded the only way that mattered. He packed a duffel and left before the sun cleared the rooftops. Claire visited me days later, makeup stripped away, looking younger than her press photos. Mom's unraveling, she said, but maybe that's the point. I wasn't sure if I felt sorrow or vindication. That night, a courier delivered a padded envelope from Hale. Inside lay the original letter Donovan had mailed from a forward operating base, the one Hale had kept in a fire safe for 15 years. The closing line hadn't changed. Tell the medic her grip never wavered. I read it until the paper softened. Hours later, another note slid beneath my door, Hale's handwriting again. He confessed he'd recognized my name the first time Evelyn dragged me to a holiday party, but silence had seemed kinder than forcing his wife to confront a war she'd never enlisted for. Claire found her mother 3 nights later in the sunroom. The barbecue rose now brittle on the coffee table. Evelyn's voice splintered. I thought keeping you small kept you safe. Claire didn't film it. She simply sat beside her and let the quiet do its work. The summons arrived on heavy cream stock, no salutation, just a date, a restaurant address, and Hale's initials. I knew before I parked that this dinner wasn't reconciliation, it was excavation. The private room smelled of cedar and candle wax. Evelyn entered first, pearls luminous against her navy dress, spine straight but knuckles white on her clutch. Claire followed, attempting small talk that dissolved against the walls. Hale placed a single envelope at the table's center. "Read it aloud," he said. Voice soft as falling ash. Claire's fingers trembled as she unfolded Donovan's letter. "Tell my commander I kept my nerve. Tell the medic her grip never wavered." The sentences hung like incense. Evelyn's mascara tracked south. One by one, Hale laid out the timeline, the report, the recognition, the years of chosen silence to shield a marriage built on performance. Evelyn's shoulders caved. "I thought control was love," she whispered. I met her gaze. "You can't love someone and erase them at the same time." Claire reached for her phone, but Hale covered her hand. "Some moments belong only to the people in the room." No apologies were spoken. None were needed. The walls we'd built brick by brick began to sag. The Veterans Hall in Portland glowed amber under chandeliers. American flags flanked the dais like silent sentries. Reporters crowded the aisles, smelling blood in the water. They wanted catharsis, a soundbite that blawed. I spotted Evelyn in the back row, posture brittle, eyes fixed on the floor. Hale sat third row center, medals catching the light, cane resting against his knee. When the MC called my name, the microphone squealed, then died. Feedback echoed, then nothing. I set my index cards on the podium and spoke into the void. "Scars are not defects, they are receipts." Applause swelled before I could draw breath. I told them about the dust that tasted like copper, about Donovan's pulse fluttering beneath my thumbs, about the promise I renewed every morning I woke up breathing. When I looked up, Hale was already standing, hand rigid at his brow. One by one, strangers rose until the hall became a single heartbeat. Afterward, Evelyn approached through the aisle, hand trembling as she brushed the ridge of tissue. "You carried it alone too long," she said. "Let us carry it now," she said us. Hale's eyes shone when I turned. "You made the boy proud, and the man too." In that instant, the scar stopped being evidence of loss. It became evidence of covenant. A year later, the cemetery outside Salem lay under a pewter sky. Rows of small flags snapped in the wind. Folding chairs formed perfect lines, the kind of order Hale had spent a lifetime enforcing. He'd slipped away in his sleep, heart finally granting the discharge he'd never requested. The bugler's notes floated over the grass and settled into the soil. I stood at the head of the grave. The bronze pin he'd given me fastened above my heart, hands steady for the first time in memory. Evelyn arrived after the rifles cracked, face gaunt but composed. She pressed something cold into my palm. When I opened my fingers, sunlight glinted off the 11th MEU insignia. "He said you carried both of us," she murmured, then walked away before tears could fall. When the chaplain asked if anyone wished to speak, I stepped forward without notes. Respect doesn't always begin at the kitchen table, but sometimes it finds its way home. I looked across the sea of uniforms and civilians. No one moved. Then a young private stood and saluted. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire assembly rose, a wave of quiet acknowledgement. The same gesture that once silenced a backyard now sealed a circle. Claire walked beside me to the parking lot, camera slung at her side, no longer hunting angles. That night she sent a 30-second clip. Me striding away from the headstone, sleeve fluttering, scar catching the last light. Caption, "The mark that taught us how to see valor." Back in my apartment, I pushed the window wide. Evening spilled in, warm and honey-colored. For the first time in 15 years, I let the breeze find the skin I'd hidden. The sun touched the scar and felt like forgiveness instead of accusation. I no longer covered it so no one would ask. I uncovered it so the light could remember where it had entered. It was never about revenge. I taught my last trudge class on a Thursday in late October. The classroom smelled of dry, erase markers and nervous sweat. 22 students, some barely old enough to shave, waited for wisdom I wasn't sure I possessed. I rolled my sleeve without thinking. A collective inhale rippled through the rows. I told them about the night the convoy burned, about choosing who to drag and who to leave, about the arithmetic of breath. Then I told them about the barbecue, about a colonel's salute, about a letter that crossed an ocean to find me. When I finished, no one clapped. They simply stared at the map on my arm as though seeing their own futures etched there. After class, a quiet kid from Nebraska lingered. He asked if the scar still hurt. "Only when I forget what it cost," I said. He nodded like a man who'd just been handed a loaded rifle and told to keep it safe. Claire launched her own podcast the following spring. First episode, an interview with Evelyn. No studio audience, no dramatic music, just two women in a sunlit kitchen. Evelyn spoke about growing up in a house where perfection was currency, about mistaking silence for strength, about the day she realized control was just fear wearing lipstick. Downloads broke records. Comments filled with variations of the same sentence. I thought I was the only one hiding someone I loved. Claire sent me the raw audio before it aired. I listened in my truck, engine idling outside the VA. When Evelyn said my name, her voice cracked on the second syllable. I'm proud of the woman she became in spite of me. I sat in the parking lot until the streetlights flickered on, tears sliding into the collar of my scrubs. Halesville surfaced a surprise bequest, a small cedar box addressed to me. Inside lay Donovan's dog tags, cleaned but still bearing the faint crescent of dried blood. A note in Hale's handwriting. He'd want you to have the whole story. I hung the tags from my rearview mirror. They caught the light every time I braked, a quiet metronome counting the distance between then and now. Some mornings I caught civilians staring at the glint, then at my arm, then away. I never explained. The tags did the talking. Years blurred. I moved into a modest bungalow with a porch swing and a garden that refused to obey. Neighbors learned not to ask about the scar. They simply left casseroles when I worked doubles. One August evening, a knock startled me from watering tomatoes. A teenage girl stood on the steps, freckles stark against summer skin, holding a manila envelope. She said her dad had served with Donovan, had carried guilt for surviving when others didn't. Inside the envelope, a single Polaroid from a dust-choked base, Donovan grinning beside a younger me, both of us sunburned and filthy, arms slung around each other like we had forever. On the back Donovan had scrawled, "To the medic who'll outlive us all." The girl asked if she could hug me. I said yes. She smelled like coconut shampoo and possibility. When she left, I pinned the photo above my desk. Every morning it reminded me that memory isn't a wound, it's a relay. Claire married a quiet cinematographer who understood the value of silence. They invited me to a small ceremony on the coast. Evelyn catered the reception herself, apron tied over a dress the color of sea glass. She hugged me without speaking, the scent of rosemary clinging to her sleeves. Later, under strings of bulb lights, she pulled me aside. "I kept one thing," she said, producing a tiny silver frame. Inside, a snapshot from the barbecue, the moment Hale saluted. My scar caught mid-flash, luminous. She'd cropped out her own stunned face. "I want to remember the day I learned what courage looks like," she said. I kept the frame on my nightstand. Some nights I woke to moonlight on the glass and felt the years fold like paper. The VA offered me a permanent training post. I accepted on the condition that every cohort visit the cemetery. We stood among the headstones while I read Donovan's letter aloud. New medics traced the dates with their eyes, calculating how young we'd all been. One spring, a storm rolled in mid-ceremony. Rain slashed sideways, plastering uniforms to skin. No one moved. Lightning illuminated the rows of white markers, and for an instant, the dead stood among us. When thunder followed, a private whispered, "They're still on watch." I believed him. On the 10th anniversary of the barbecue, Claire organized a reunion at the same backyard. Paper lanterns glowed against dusk. Children I didn't recognize chased fireflies. Evelyn had aged into softness, laugh lines deeper than the frown furrows she'd once cultivated. She found me by the grill, now manned by a cousin who'd never known war. She pressed a small velvet pouch into my hand. Inside the wine-stained tablecloth from that first dinner, laundered but bearing a faint rust-colored ghost. "I thought we could cut it into bookmarks," she said, "so every story we tell carries a piece of that day." We spent the evening slicing fabric while relatives added their own memories to the pile. Someone suggested quilting the scraps into a wall hanging for the local VFW. By midnight, the lawn was littered with laughter and loose threads. I still teach, still garden, still wake some nights tasting smoke. But the scar no longer dictates wardrobe choices. It simply exists. A topographical map of a night the world tried to forget. Children point at the grocery store. I let them trace the ridges with sticky fingers. Their parents apologize. I tell them it's okay. Curiosity is the first step toward understanding. Some afternoons I drive to the coast alone, park facing the Pacific, and read Donovan's letter aloud to the waves. The tide carries my voice farther than any microphone ever could. Gulls wheel overhead, unimpressed by human drama. I like their indifference. It reminds me the planet keeps spinning long after our wars end. Claire's podcast won awards. She accepted them in jeans and bare feet, thanking her mother, her uncle, and the medic who taught her that truth doesn't need a filter. Evelyn started a scholarship for children of fallen service members. The first recipient was the freckled girl who delivered the Polaroid. She studied nursing, graduated top of her class, and now works the ER night shift. She texts me photos of her first solo trauma save, caption always the same steady hands. I save every one. The bungalow porch swing creaks under autumn weight. I sit with tea gone cold, watching leaves surrender to gravity. Across the street, a young couple unloads moving boxes. The woman wears a prosthetic leg, carbon fiber gleaming. She catches me looking, lifts her chin in greeting. I lift my arm in return. We don't need words, the language of altered skin is fluent. Later, she'll knock with a plate of cookies and questions she's afraid to ask. I'll invite her to the swing, tell her about a boy who loved dogs and a colonel who saluted across a picnic table. She'll cry. I'll hand her tissues and the knowledge that some stories begin with fire and end with porch light. Years from now, when my own hair silvers and my hands tremble pouring tea, someone will ask about the mark. I'll smile, roll my sleeve, and say it's where the light got in. They'll want details. I'll give them just enough to carry forward, the way Donovan's 9 words carried me. The rest will stay between me, the smoke, and the sea. Because some truths are too large for one lifetime, but exactly the right size for passing along. The years kept folding into themselves, the way old letters do when you keep them too long in a drawer. I turned 43 on a Tuesday that smelled of rain and wet cedar. Claire sent a text at dawn coffee at the old diner. Mom's driving. I smiled at the screen. Evelyn behind the wheel of her sensible hybrid, still insisting on picking the route even when the GPS disagreed. I met them at the same booth where Hale had once slid the bronze pin across the table. The vinyl had cracked in new places, but the coffee still tasted like burnt pennies and comfort. Evelyn's hair had gone the color of storm clouds. Cut short now, practical. She ordered oatmeal without looking at the menu. Claire filmed nothing. Her phone stayed face down. We talked about ordinary things. Tomato blight, the neighbor's yapping terrier, the way grief sneaks up disguised as a missed turn. When the check came, Evelyn reached for it with the same reflexive authority she'd once used to police my posture. I let her pay. Some habits die harder than others. That winter, the VA expanded the training wing. They named the new simulation lab after Donovan. The dedication ceremony was small, a handful of brass, a reporter from the local paper, and a dozen cadets who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. A bronze plaque gulled the entry, in memory of Sergeant Donovan Hale, who kept his nerve so others could keep their lives. Evelyn stood beside me in a navy coat, gloveless despite the cold. When the cloth dropped from the plaque, she inhaled sharply, the way people do when they see their own reflection after years of avoiding mirrors. Afterward, she asked if she could see the lab. I walked her through the mannequins wired with pulsing veins, the mock rubble pile, the speaker system that could mimic rotor wash. She touched the edge of a stretcher, fingers lingering on the canvas straps. He lay on something like this, she said. Not a question, I nodded. She didn't cry. She simply stood in the artificial dust and let the moment settle. Claire's second child arrived in March, a girl with Donovan's crooked grin. They named her Harper, after me, though Claire swore it was also for the author she'd loved in college. The baby's first outing was to the bungalow porch. I held her while Claire wrestled the stroller up the steps. Harper's tiny fist closed around my index finger, grip fierce for something so new. Evelyn arrived with a quilt pieced from the barbecue tablecloth scraps. Each square a different cousin's handwriting, dates stitched in red thread. She spread it over the swing like a baptism. For nights when the world feels too big, she said. We wrapped the baby in it, and for a moment the porch smelled of cedar shavings and new beginnings instead of old smoke. I started writing the book no one asked for, not a memoir. Too many of those already lined the base exchange shelves, but a field manual disguised as stories. Chapter 1. How to choose who to drag when the sky is on fire. Chapter 7. What to do with a salute you didn't earn. I wrote in the mornings before the garden woke up, coffee cooling beside the laptop. Some pages came easy, others required 3 miles of walking the river path until the sentences untangled. Claire read the drafts and argued over commas the way we once argued over curfews. Evelyn asked to proof the dedication. I let her. She crossed out my original line and wrote, "To the boy who taught us courage looks like steady hands, and to the girl who learned to carry it forward." I left it exactly as she'd written it. The freckled ER nurse, now Dr. Maya Lin, invited me to grand rounds at the children's hospital. She wanted the residents to hear about triage from someone who'd done it with a broken watch and no backup. I wore short sleeves under the white coat they loaned me. The scar caught the projector light during the PowerPoint, a pale lightning bolt against the blue screen. A third year asked if I ever regretted enlisting. I told her regret is a luxury you can't afford when someone's femoral is spurting. She laughed, then looked horrified, then laughed again when I said laughter is sometimes the only tourniquet that works. Maya texted later, "You broke them in the best way." Evelyn's 80th birthday fell on a perfect June day, the kind that makes you believe in mercy. Claire rented the same backyard, now ringed with raised garden beds Claire's husband had built from reclaimed barn wood. Grandchildren, some blood, some chosen, chased bubbles across the grass. The grill smoked with salmon instead of burgers. Evelyn had sworn off red meat after her cholesterol scare. She wore a sundress the color of hydrangeas and a straw hat that refused to stay put. When the cake arrived, lemon with blackberry filling, her favorite, I caught her staring at the picnic table. Same checkered cloth, new stains. She touched the corner where the wine had spilled all those years ago. Still there, she murmured. I knew she didn't mean the fabric. Later, she pulled me into the shade of the maple. I have something, she said, producing a small tin box. Inside the dried rose from the barbecue, petals brittle but intact. I thought we could scatter it with Marcus, she said. He'd like the company. We drove to the cemetery the next morning, just the two of us. She crumbled the petals over the grass, whispering apologies to the wind. I added a handful of sand I'd kept in a vial since Kandahar. The grains caught the breeze and vanished, indistinguishable from memory. The book launched quietly at the indie bookstore downtown. No podium, just a circle of folding chairs and a table stacked with copies. Veterans showed up in wheelchairs and running prosthetics. A mother brought her teenage son who'd lost a leg to a lawnmower accident. She wanted him to see that scars could be passports, not prisons. I read the chapter about the diner, about the pin, about the first time someone called my mark earned. When I looked up, Evelyn sat in the back row, eyes shining but dry. Afterward, she signed the quilt square she'd contributed to the bookstore's community, Art Wall Evelyn Harper. Learning late. Loving anyway. Someone took a photo. It ended up on the store's Instagram with the caption "Redemption comes in chapters." Maya's residency ended. She accepted a trauma fellowship in Baltimore, but asked if she could shadow me one last shift before she left. We worked a pile up on the interstate, 3 cars, 6 patients, rain slashing sideways. She took lead on a driver with a flail chest while I stabilized a child with a scalp lac. Our hands moved in the choreography we'd rehearsed 100 times in sim labs. But this time the blood was warm and the stakes irreversible. When the last patient rolled to surgery, Maya peeled off her gloves and looked at me. "Steady," she said. I laughed, the sound echoing off the trauma bay tiles. She hugged me hard enough to crack ribs. "You taught me that," she whispered. I let her think so. Claire's marriage hit a rough patch the way all long ones do. Quiet resentments, unspoken calendars, the slow erosion of listening. She showed up at the bungalow at 2 a.m., with Harper asleep in the car seat and tears tracking mascara. We sat on the porch swing under the quilt, rocking in silence until the baby stirred. Claire said she'd forgotten how to be seen outside the roles of mother, producer, daughter. I told her about the night I realized the scar wasn't the only thing I'd been hiding. We drank chamomile gone cold and watched the streetlights flicker. By dawn, she'd decided to take the kids to the coast for a week, no devices, no deadlines. She texted later, "The ocean doesn't care about my byline." I saved the message. Evelyn's health began its slow retreat, first the knees, then the memory for names. Then the afternoons she spent staring at the maple, as if waiting for someone to come down the driveway. Claire moved her into the bungalow's back bedroom, the one with the window overlooking the garden. I taught her to use the coffee maker with the big buttons. She taught me how to make pie crust flaky enough to make a grown man weep. Some evenings we played gin rummy while Harper colored on old Trayage worksheets. Evelyn's hands trembled shuffling cards, but her trash talk remained lethal. "You're holding that queen like it owes you money," she'd cackle. I let her win exactly half the time. The documentary came out of nowhere. A streaming service optioned the book. Sent a crew of earnest 20, somethings who'd never heard an IED detonate. They wanted reenactments, slow-motion blood, a swelling soundtrack. I met them at the diner and laid down terms: no actors, no fake explosions, no voice of God narration. They could film the scar, the letters, the quilt, the garden. but the story stayed in the mouths of the people who'd lived it. The director, a woman with a buzz cut and kind eyes, agreed. They followed me to the cemetery, to the VA lab, to the porch where Evelyn now napped under the barbecue quilt. Claire narrated her own segments, voice steady but softer than her podcast persona. Maya flew in from Baltimore to demonstrate a cricothyrotomy on a mannequin while explaining why my hands had been the last thing Donovan saw. The final cut ran 90 minutes and ended with Harper, now toddling, touching the scar and asking, "Does it hurt, Aunt Leela?" I answered on camera, "Only when I forget to tell the truth." The film premiered at a small festival in Seattle. Critics called it quietly devastating. Veterans called it finally accurate. Evelyn watched it once, then asked me to turn it off before the credits. "I lived it," she said. "Don't need to see it in 4K. Harper started kindergarten. Her backpack was bigger than her torso. On the first day, she insisted on wearing a T-shirt Claire had printed with the words "Steady Hands Club." The teacher sent a note home. Harper explained scars to the class during show and tell. No one cried. Everyone listened. Claire framed the note above the kitchen sink. Evelyn added a post-it proud doesn't cover it. I turned 50 on a day the garden decided to riot with zinnias. Claire threw a potluck, the porch overflowed with folding chairs and casserole dishes. Maya flew in with her new fiancé, a paramedic who could tie a tourniquet one-handed. Evelyn held court from the swing, dispensing pie and unsolicited advice in equal measure. Someone plugged in string lights, someone else started a playlist of 90s country. Harper led a conga line of second cousins through the herb beds. At dusk, Claire clinked a spoon against her glass. "Speech!" she demanded. I stood on the porch steps, barefoot, wine sloshing in a jelly jar. I told them about the first time I let the sun touch the scar without flinching. About the night Evelyn scattered rose petals and sand. About the way Maya's hands had trembled less with every life she saved. I ended with the only line that mattered: we carry each other in pieces, and somehow the quilt still holds. No one clapped. They simply raised their jars in the half-light, a quiet salute that needed no command. Evelyn's decline accelerated the following spring. The doctor used words like palliative and comfort measures. We moved the hospital bed to the back bedroom so she could watch the garden surrender to summer. Claire took leave from the podcast. Maya rearranged her fellowship. We took shifts reading aloud, mysteries, gardening manuals, the triage textbook I'd written. Harper learned to tiptoe and to whisper "I love you, Grandma Evie" in a voice that could melt steel. One afternoon, Evelyn asked for the tin box with the dried rose. She held a petal to the light, fragile as onion skin. "Scatter the rest with me," she said. I knew what she meant. We waited for a morning when the pain meds aligned with clarity. Claire drove. Maya pushed the wheelchair. Harper carried the tin like a reliquary. At the cemetery, we gathered around Hale's stone. Evelyn crumbled the last petals into the grass, then reached for my arm. Her fingers traced the scar with the reverence she once reserved for Crystal. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Now let me keep mine." She pressed the 11th MEU pin, the one she'd carried since the funeral, into my palm, for the next set of steady hands. That night, she slipped away while Harper sang a made-up lullaby about fireflies and brave medics. We buried her beside Hale under a joint stone that read, "They learned late, but they learned together." The bungalow felt too large afterward. I wandered rooms that smelled of lavender and antiseptic. Claire moved in with the kids for a month, then 6. We converted Evelyn's bedroom into a library for the quilt and the letters and the dog tags that still hung from the rear view of my truck. Harper claimed the porch swing as headquarters for her superhero headquarters. She drew capes on every photo of Donovan she could find. Maya sent care packages of Baltimore crab seasoning and notes that always ended steady. I kept teaching, kept gardening, kept waking at 3 a.m. to the phantom smell of diesel. But the scar no longer woke me. It simply was a riverbed where the current had carved its permanent course. On the 20th anniversary of the barbecue, we held a picnic in the same backyard. The maple had grown so wide its shade swallowed the table. Claire's husband manned the grill. Maya's fiancé mixed lemonade strong enough to pucker saints. Harper, now tall enough to reach the lowest branch, organized a water balloon fight that left everyone dripping and laughing. Someone hung the quilt from the clothesline like a banner. Children traced the embroidered dates with sticky fingers. At sunset, Claire dimmed the string lights and passed around a single envelope. Inside a new letter, written in Harper's careful second-grade printing. To the medic who taught us how to carry fire without burning. She read it aloud, voice cracking on the last line. When she finished, no one spoke. Then Maya stood and saluted, not military crisp but heartfelt. One by one, the others followed, cousins, neighbors, the mailman who'd wandered over for a hot dog. Harper tugged my sleeve. Your turn, she said. I raised my arm, scar catching the last light, and saluted back. The gesture rippled through the yard like rings in still water. Later, when the fireflies came out and the children collapsed in heaps of exhausted limbs, I walked to the garden's edge. The zinnias had seeded themselves into chaos, pink, orange, gold, defiant. I pressed the 11th MEU pin into the soil at the base of the tallest stalk. Let the next gardener wonder at the glint. Claire found me there, barefoot in the dew. She didn't ask what I was doing. She simply linked her arm through mine and rested her head on my shoulder. We stood in silence until the stars outnumbered the fireflies. Somewhere in the dark, a screen door creaked. The same sound my father's porch had made when I was 9 and racing after light. I closed my eyes and smelled cedar smoke, blackberry pie, and the faint metallic tang of possibility. The scar tingled, not with pain but with memory doing its quiet work. I was 55, barefoot in my own garden, surrounded by people who'd learned to see me whole. The war hadn't ended, but the battle for worth had. And in the hush between heartbeats, I understood the light doesn't just enter through the wound. Sometimes it grows there, wild and tall, until the whole damn garden blooms.